Awesome. We are live. So welcome to the Rick Fuller podcast presented by Rick Fuller, the team leader of the #1 real estate team in the San Francisco Bay Area and Sac County for most recent sales, according to Zillow. Rick is a community leader with a hot wife. Hey, Jen. He's a national real estate coach and real estate investing expert. He and his team will also be featured on the cover of Top Agent magazine, complete with a 5-page spread in the November issue. And you are also in the Antioch Herald, so you are getting tons of press. Great job, Rick.
Thank you, Christina. That was such a cool article in Top Agent magazine, and just an opportunity to share what our team is doing and our amazing clients. We've had the privilege of now serving over 1,200 clients, which is just super cool.
Wow, that's incredible, especially during this unique season. You are thriving. So well done, Rick and team. So I'm Christina Morales, a writer and marketing specialist, and Rick is my friend and mentor. Today, we're going to talk about Rick's 888 formula to determine whether an investment property makes financial sense. And the more information I get, the more comfortable I feel about investing. So thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom on this. I know today's going to be so helpful, so thank you.
Well, this is my element, Christina, because I'm a nerd at heart, a geek, a nerd. And so we get to talk about numbers. We get to talk about strategy. We get to talk about it, kind of looking at the numbers and figuring out what to do.
Yeah.
So this is my sweet spot. And then so many times where people go wrong. A mentor of mine once said, if you do the numbers will tell you what to do. So many people, they see it in a great investment property and they like the location, they like the floor plan, they like the amenities, and they never even ran the numbers. And that's okay to do from a perspective of hey, this is going to be your primary residence. And that certainly that matters, right? That you like it, that you're comfortable. But from an investment side, shouldn't the numbers lead the discussion, because it is for investment? And so I'm really excited to get into this topic.
Me too, because, my dad's a CPA, but somehow the gene of math and numbers skipped me. So please be detailed and talk slow, because this is out of my realm. So I'm so glad I have you. So what is the 888 formula and how did you come up with it?
Well, let's start with how we came up with it. I had realized after looking at property after property at property, both with people who actually lived in a home and their primary residence, and they were figuring out, should we rent this, Rick, or should we sell it? And I looked at actual investment properties where people are buying purely for the sake of investment. They never had no intentions of occupying the property. That these three metrics, these three factors showed up over and over and over again. And so we began to call them the 888 because each of them relate to 8%. Now, the first 888, or the first 8% that we always look at, is vacancy. The second 888 that we look at is the maintenance of that property. And the third 888 is the management of that property. And it doesn't mean that it's always 8%, but we found that 8%, which equates to about 1 month's rent. That's what 8% equates to when you actually do the number. 8% of your rental income typically goes to maintenance. 8% of your rental income typically goes to maintenance, vacancy, maintenance, and then 8% typically goes to management. Now, those numbers, I think, are always helpful, because most homeowners that I met with that are thinking, Rick, should I sell my house or should I rent it? When they think about their property, they don't think about it through the lens of 888. What they do is they say, my mortgage payment is X amount, and I think I can get X amount in rent, and so therefore I cash flow. And I say, no, you don't, because you're only going to receive about 74% of that rent. Well, why 74%? Because when I remove 8 and 8 and 8, there's 74% remaining. And when we would have that conversation with countless homeowners, they begin to have the numbers, have the facts, have the details that they needed to make a good decision of whether they should keep it and rent it or whether they should sell it. And depending on those numbers, oftentimes they decided to sell, and many times they decided to rent the property. For investors, they would see a home and they would look at, does this home make sense? Are we generating enough rental income? And oftentimes they'd look at gross income, total receipts, and not take into consideration these AAA to evaluate the health and the financial health of that particular property. And so for them, they were always intending from the beginning for this to be an investment property. And this AAA formula helps them evaluate whether this is a healthy property to purchase. Now, this AAA formula, what's I think really, really helpful is that people understand that it's generally 8% in each of these categories for a good investment. But what if you have a home or a property, an investment property that has higher turnover? Maybe every year it takes 2 months to rent it instead of 1 month to rent it. Well, then the 8% gives you a barometer, and you know that you're probably a little on the unhealthy side when it comes to the vacancy of that property. What about maintenance? If you buy a brand new home or a brand new investment property, or maybe a commercial building, and you're doing what we call a triple net lease, which means that the tenant is really doing a lot of the maintenance and the management of the property, then maybe 8% is too high. And maybe it's more 6 or 5, 6, or even 7% going to maintenance. But if you bought an older home, you could see how that number could climb significantly. And if you look at 8% for property management, in some communities, I see property management agreements that they're at 6 or 7%. I see some that are at 10. And so what I found is that a healthy investment tends to have about 8% for maintenance, 8% for property management, and 8% for vacancy. And if I knew those three, then I knew I could take into consideration whether I was willing to move outside of that budget category to a higher percentage because of unique factors associated in an older community. It's in a community that has less turnover or more turnover. It's in a community where there's less property managers available to serve that property. Maybe it's like a vacation rental. Certainly your management costs on a vacation rental that's turning over every weekend is much, much higher than on a commercial building that it only turns over once every 5 to 7 years. Maybe you're on a 10-year lease. So these 888 numbers tend to not only give you the numbers that you need to at a glance quickly evaluate whether this is going to be a healthy investment, but it also gives you what we typically see as a good budget percentage to begin to invest in real estate. Things that are outside of that can begin to take into consideration. And so homeowners who own a property can now make a better decision about whether they rent it or whether they sell it, because they understand the inherent costs associated with it being an investment. And investors can now look at an investment and quickly calculate whether or not this investment property cash flows.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get specific. And so let's walk through the numbers step by step. And so let's say I'm considering buying a vacation rental. It's a condo. Let's say it's 250 grand. And my interest rate right now, they're super low. It's like 3%. And I have a 15-year loan. And that would basically make my payment around $1,700 a month. How do I know if this is a good investment? How would you crunch these numbers?
Well, let's start off with the first thing that we would need to know is what could you get for rent for this property? What's the income, right, for this property? Any other type of investment that you're going to buy, you've got to think, what is the income potential? And, you know, Christina, on past podcasts, I believe there's 4 kinds of investors. There's what I call the real estate speculator. And what they're doing is they're speculating only on appreciation. They're in hopes that whatever they buy, you mentioned a home that's $250,000 or a condo, and they hope that in the future it's worth 260, 270, 280, 300 and more, right? And that's the speculator. And I would tell you, if you're a real estate speculator and you're optimistic and bullish on the real estate market, that's an incomplete. You're only operating with a portion of the value of real estate. And it's an incomplete picture, and it's an inaccurate picture because markets don't always rise. They don't always fall. They're very cyclical in nature. And so if you're a speculator that value is going to go up, That's not a good way to ascertain a value of a property because the market changes. The second type of investor that we see, Christina, they're what I call the spectator. And I know I meet a lot of spectators. They watch this late night commercial and they sit back and say, if I ever buy an investment property, this is what it's going to be. Or I want to buy an investment property, no money down. Or I want to buy an investment property, double escrow. Or I want to buy an investment property through an assignment, receive a finder's fee. And generally, I can tell immediately that they're spectators. They're watching, they're learning. Nothing wrong with being a spectator. It's just spectators are not in the game.
Mm-hmm.
They're not in the game. They're up in the stands. They're armchair quarterbacks. This is what I would do. This is what I could do. This is what this person said to do. And part of why we do these podcasts is we want the spectators who are watching what's happening with real estate investment and saying, look, this is a healthy investment. Mm-hmm. And unlike stocks, I can go and walk the land. Unlike bonds, I can go and I can go and open the door of a property that I own. Unlike money that can be printed more of it, there's no more land that's going to be created. It is finite. There's only so much land. And so the spectator, I like the spectator because I want to help them go from a spectator to the real estate investor. And the real estate investor looks beyond the speculator. Speculators only hoping the value is going up. They're looking beyond the spectator because they're actually in the game. They are an investor and they're working play by play on how they invest. They're using the 888 formula to make good decisions, good, wise decisions. They're in the game and they are actually looking at income. And then we have what we call the real estate collectors. And those are my favorite people to talk to because they have a collection of property. They don't just have residential, they have commercial. They don't just have residential or commercial, they've diversified by having them in different communities and different states and different area. And they own residential, and this one might be a condo like what you described. Mm-hmm. And some people own a residential and it's a vacation home. Or they rent out an office building or a commercial complex, or they own a small shopping center, an apartment building. And those are what I call real estate collectors. You know, when I was a kid, we'd collect baseball cards or we would collect Hot Wheels. And, you know, you would show, hey, these are the Hot Wheels that I have when your friend came over to play. These are the baseball cards that I have when your friend came over. It's no different, except the price tag is much bigger. And it's typically adults that are saying, these are the investments that I have. They're not doing it from an arrogant perspective. They just become a collector of real estate. Mm-hmm. And so the part of the equation that's missing is what could you get for rent on this property, right? What could you get for rent? What's the income? And that makes you a real estate investor when you're looking at income. Robert Kiyosaki, when he wrote his original books about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the cash flow quadrant, all the books that he had written, his primary premise was know the numbers and know that real estate is an income producing, real estate investment is an income producing product. And so it's one of the great benefits of owning real estate is the ability to receive a rental income, usually from rents. So the answer to your question would be, okay, what's the rent that is associated with this property? So if we used, for simple math, since I don't have any calculators here in front of me, if you could collect $2,000 a month in rent, okay, and you had a payment of $1,700 for the payment, then we begin to say, okay, what does our net rent equate to? Now, the 888 formula, by the way, is also not comprehensive. There could be other things associated. You mentioned a condo. Well, what about the HOA fees? What about assessments? There are other things. It's not a comprehensive list, but it's the big three that I see that we have to reduce from gross rent. And so if we were to use the $2,000 a month in rent, the first thing I would do is say, well, you're going to have, Christina, on this investment, do you realize you're going to have 8% of that amount of money going towards, of the $2,000, we multiply that annually to $24,000, and 8% of that $24,000 needs to be set aside for vacancy. And then I would say, Christina, we also need to set aside some for maintenance. Now, you mentioned a condo. Inherently, the condo has less maintenance because you're generally buying sheetrock in. Where if you're buying a single family home, you have to repair the roof or the siding or even maintain a pool. And the HOA typically does that on a condo. So in this situation that you've described, we'd probably have even less than 8%, but we'd look at 8% as a base. That's the base number that you ought to consider for maintenance on this property, because you're still responsible for the water heater and the dishwasher. You're still responsible for your own personal heater or air conditioner on the unit. And these things, you need to set aside some money for that. And then we would say, well, Christina, in addition to that, you're going to have likely a property manager. Unless you're going to operate as your property manager, which is certainly an option, most people hire a professional property manager. They hire a professional property manager to market and advertise the property and find the tenant. And for purpose of full disclosure, we do not operate a property management company. So that's not a service or business that we're in. We refer to several local property managers that do a great job. And if you need that, let us know. We're happy to help you. But a property manager, and that should be 8%. And so maintenance, vacancy, and property management. And sometimes property managers are a little higher based on the amount of effort that's needed, sometimes a little lower, but generally about 8%. So we would take the $2,000 a month in rental income, and we would subtract that 24%. So you have your calculator?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's do it. $2,000 a month, and let's go ahead and multiply this out over the course of a year. So that's $24,000, right, in rental income.
Mm-hmm.
And let's minus out, and we'll just go ahead and add all of them up, and let's do 24%. So what does that come to? And that's what you should assume for vacancy, maintenance, and property management on a basic templated property, a property that doesn't need a lot of additional maintenance, a lot of additional vacancy, or a lot of additional property management. What'd you come up with?
I added it wrong. What is it? Like?
Okay, so let's do this. Let's
Okay.
make it on a monthly basis. So $2,000 times 0.76.
Okay. 1,520.
Okay, so your rental income, remember, is $1,728, right? That's the number you gave me, $1,726.
Right.
And now let's go ahead and then your rent, then after the 888 formula, what's your real rental income? That's the number you gave me. What's 1,500 and how much?
1,520. Mm-hmm.
And 1,520. So what we know is that we're off about $206, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can do that math in my head. So a homeowner that's thinking about, am I going to keep this property?
Okay.
Or am I going to rent this property? If you consider renting it and they don't consider the 888 formula, then what could happen is they think, well, my payment's $1,726. I'm collecting $2,000 a month in rent. I'm going to make a couple $100 a month, and this is a win-win for me. But if they know the 888 formula, it's actually just the opposite. Every month they are likely to lose a couple $100. And so by knowing the numbers will tell you what to do. So in this scenario, we would say, based on your 15-year mortgage, you have a negative cash flow on this property. Mm-hmm. You are going to have to write a check, and you may not write a check every month because you don't always have maintenance or vacancy or even property management sometimes every month, but you're certainly going to be writing a check in the long run for this property. And that can be, that can persuade or discourage someone from buying an investment property. Now, if we move forward and we said, well, if the rental income was $2,000 and your payment was only $1,200 a month, then every month there's a $200, $250 cash flow based on this 888 formula. Mm-hmm. So it helps to look at an investment through the lens of 888, which gives you the ability to ascertain and determine whether that's a good investment or not. And that's what we want. We're not saying buy that property or don't buy that property, buy that investment or don't buy that investment. What I am saying is no surprises. Don't buy it and own it for a year and say, why is my account in the red? What are these bank fees? What are these overdraft fees? And if you don't know the 888 formula, that's likely to happen. Now, you mentioned one other thing, and I want to address it before we move on, and it's a 15-year mortgage. I am shocked today at how many investors are doing a 30-year mortgage, an adjustable rate mortgage, or they're doing a mortgage like a pick-a-payment plan. It is unbelievable that they're still doing that today with the low interest rates, especially for a long-term hold trajectory on that property, why would you ever not do a 15? If you're going to do a mortgage, why would you not do a 15-year mortgage? A 15-year mortgage for your primary residence or for an investment property has a whole host of benefits. Most people never even consider it. The first benefit, obviously, you pay it off in 15 years. And when I ask people, I say, what are you going to be doing in 15 years? And some of the people I talk to say, in 15 years, my kids are going to be in school, college. In 15 years, I'll be in retirement. In 15 years, I may not have the income. So by paying it off in 15 years, that money, in your case here, $1,726 that was going to the bank is no longer going to the mortgage. It's no longer going to the bank. It's now preserved in your bank account. You own it free and clear. And the best real estate of all, the best way to own real estate is to own it free and clear, hands down, because then you are receiving the cash flow that's accumulated as a result, and you're not sending it out to a bank. Another reason to do a 15-year mortgage in the example that you've chosen is every time you make a payment, every single payment, you're going to pay some to interest and some to principal. On a 30-year mortgage, the bulk of it generally goes to interest and the minority of it goes to principal. It's just the opposite on almost every 15-year mortgage, certainly under the low interest rates that we're seeing now. Right now, if you were to buy a property and do a 15-year mortgage, the majority of your payment in the scenario you've given me, the majority of the $1,726 is going to go to principal. And I found that there's always two ways to accumulate equity. You can either A, obtain appreciation on the property. That's a good way to do it. But it's even better if we can begin to reduce your principal balance. That gap, that delta, that difference, that is equity. That's what you want to build. And let's build it on both sides. Let's build it with appreciation, but let's also build it with a reduction of the principal balance. And one of the big benefits to a 15-year mortgage is that you're going to carve out a lot larger chunk of your payment to the principal balance, driving down your principal balance rapidly. And the third benefit to a 15-year mortgage that few people know is it's generally got a lower interest rate. So not only is it pay it off in 15 years, not only do you have the ability to take large chunks of money and drive down the principal balance because more of the payment goes to the principal balance, less of it goes to interest, but you're also having a less of an interest rate. And what you're going to find is on most properties, most investments, and even a primary residence, the 15-year mortgage, it saves you tens of thousands, or often, depending on the purchase price, hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest. Every time I do this with a calculator with somebody, they'll say, oh my goodness, I had no idea the massive savings, the unbelievably massive savings associated with us doing a 15-year mortgage. We're saving tens of thousands of dollars in mortgage interest. And that's interest that we can drive to the bottom line of this property. That's interest that we can save to keep you have a healthy bank account when it comes to your investment. That's money that we can use to double down and pay off the property that much quicker by paying additional principal balances. It is a game changer to move from a 30-year to a 15-year mortgage. So I hope that answers your question based on the scenario. Once we look at the income, we can then apply the 888 formula to see not what our gross rent is, but really what our net rent is. And that's what we want to see as we begin to evaluate. Do I keep it? Do I sell it? Do I buy this investment property? What am I really going to be left with at the end of the year?
And you mentioned, what if we had $200 over that was profit? Should we put that towards principal?
Oh, I love that question. I believe the best real estate to own is paid for free and clear. It has no mortgage at all. And when you have cash flow on the property, it affords you options. If you have no cash flow, there's nothing left over at the end of the day. When you have cash flow at the end of the month and you have extra money in the account, all the bills are paid and there's still a remaining balance, you could do several things with it. One, you can save money for a rainy day. Even properties need a reserve account, right? You gave me an example of a homeowners association. Let's take a a gate at a homeowners association as an example. The gate that was installed 15 years ago may be at the end of its life. And at some point, you might have to chip in with other homeowners in the community and the association to repair the gate. That's called a special assessment. Or on your property, you might need a roof or a water heater, or you might need, it's time to replace the carpet or the flooring or update the kitchen. And having cash flow allows those dollars to be preserved. Another way you can use it is exactly what you said, Christina, and that's taking the money and applying it to your principal balance. You will be shocked how fast your mortgage payment, I like to call it the mortgage principal balance, will just crumble. It just deteriorates. It becomes almost exciting to look at when you're adding additional money to your principal. And when Jennifer and I started doing this, oh my goodness, well over 20 years now, adding just a little extra. We had little kids at home 15 years ago. We couldn't do very much. Even $50 extra a month will crumble your principal balance. It will begin to decline. And you'll go from getting a mortgage statement and not even wanting to look at it to opening up, wanting to frame it and putting it in on your wall in between your family pictures. Okay, there's April, there's autumn, there's our mortgage statement, there's summer. It might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but you become excited about looking at your mortgage statement because you're seeing the progress that you're making. Remember, it's two ways to accumulate equity. We can accumulate equity by increasing value or reducing the principal balance on your mortgage. Both of them produce equity. And in various markets where the value is not rising, sometimes the only option you have is to drive down the principal balance. And you can do that by making extra principal balance on your payment. It will absolutely be a game changer for most people if they follow it. And they'll take a 15-year and they'll carve it into a 12 or an 11 or a 10 or an 8-year mortgage. And now they're paying on a 15-year mortgage, but they're paying extra in such a way that the mortgage now will be paid off in 10 years. Wow, that would be incredible for most people to have that rental income or to not have a house payment at all in 10 to 15 years from now.
And do market fluctuations or interest rates, we're seeing a lot going on right now. Does that influence the 888 formula?
Well, I think it influences your rental income, which you're right. I mean, if you think about it, if right now interest rates are very, very low. And so there's a huge incentive for people to buy real estate. So we see renters, tenants saying, I don't know that I want to keep paying these high rents when interest rates are so low. I can buy a property and the payment's pretty close. I'm going to buy instead of rent. So we see that too. But yet we also see home values that are so high that people say, I'm not ready for that. Let me rent. And that produces a pool of tenants. And so does it impact the 888 formula? It does. And it does primarily because it impacts the amount of rent that you're going to receive. In a very strong landlord market, there's lots of opportunities. There's lots of applications that come through so that you can legitimately pick the right applicant with the right financials that can rent the property and afford to pay for the home. You're having a good, solid, healthy rent. In a very strong renters market, you might see lots of properties available and landlords that are doing incentives. You've seen signs that say, move in and the first month will cost you $1. Those are generally occurring in a stronger renters market where renters have the advantage. And so all of that tends to impact the rental income that you receive and the amount of money that you're going to ask in rent for a property. And so this formula, although it does change, but it stays relevant on every property that you purchase and allows you the ability to view it from that lens so that if you run the numbers can accurately tell you what to do.
And so how often should you assess this formula for each of your properties to ensure that rising costs aren't eating into your profits or that you're taking advantage of rising rent prices in your area? Yeah,
there's an old quote that says, what a person measures moves. So if you measure it, it moves.
Yeah.
So The type of properties that you own, I know people who tell me they look at their property or their financial statement, their net worth, they look at it every day. And I
Wow.
know some other people that say, no, I own a commercial building and I've got a 10-year lease and it's well ratified and everything's in place and I'm going to look at it once a month. And then I have other people that say I own lots of properties. They're that real estate collector that I talked about. And what they're doing is they have a P&L created, a profit and loss statement for all of their properties, and they do it once a quarter. And so we have some, and then you have some that evaluate it based on the annual every year. They take it to their tax professional and say, hey, here's the kind of income I received. Here's my depreciation. Here's my AAA. And they're walking the property manager or the accountant through that, and they're learning about the tax benefits of owning real estate at that point. So it's difficult to say that there's a cadence that every person should follow.
Okay.
Depending on the type of property, the more volatile it is, and the more the market is changing, the more you need to measure what matters. And measuring these things are really important. Regardless of how often you look at it, whether you're the person that looks at it daily, whether you're the person that looks at it monthly or quarterly or annually, regardless of which option you choose, you've got to look at it. And you've got to do it from a perspective, you want to remove the emotions and get an accountant that actually runs these numbers for you. They actually present you the reports. Because when you do that, and then you could actually see the 888 move from percentage to actual dollars spent with line items on each and every one and where that money is spent. So I don't know that there's a standard that I could say for most people, they ought to look at it on this cadence, this periodization. Regardless, they should look at it. And depending on the volatility of that property and the volatility of that market, if I own an investment property in a market that rents are rapidly rising, I might want to look at it a lot more often. If I'm looking at an investment property, maybe a commercial property with a long-term tenancy, probably less frequently.
And how do you check what the going rent value is? What's the best way to analyze
Oh,
that?
that's a great question. You know, when somebody asks me that question, it parallels well to also how do you know what the current market value is of a home? The current market value of a property, what a property is worth, is really not what the seller wants. It's not what the agent thinks it'll sell for. It's certainly not what the appraiser or even the tax assessor think. Those are all values. It's just not market value. You might have appraised value, you might have assessed value, but it's certainly not what the market value. Market value is very simple. Market value is what is a buyer willing to pay for it. If a buyer is willing, whatever a buyer is willing to pay for it, that's what market value is. Well, how do you know that until you have the buyer? Well, you look at what buyers were willing to pay for one like it. Just like it, what was a buyer willing to pay for it? Now, we parallel that over to your question was, what about rental income? Same thing. We want to look and say, what would other tenants in the market for the last 6 months, maybe last 9 months, maybe even last year, what were they willing to rent that property for? What were they willing to pay for space in that commercial building? What were they willing to pay for the night on an Airbnb, a VRBO? What are they willing to pay on a monthly rental income based on, they were willing to pay for that based on other properties that were fully exposed, fully to the market. The market had the ability to produce all the buyers, all the tenants that are available. And because of that, this is what they could rent for. And when you begin to discover that, you'll be able to see that tenants were willing to pay X number of dollars in rent, or they weren't. And that becomes the market rate for rent, just like it becomes the market value of the value of your property.
And you've mentioned like VRBOs and long-term rentals and commercial properties. Is there one that's easier to test this on? Because it seems like a VRBO has, and a short-term rental has a lot more moving parts to it. So is there a way to slowly step into this too?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And you think, well, their maintenance might be higher than 8%. Why is that? Well, people are lugging in suitcases every Friday. or every Thursday, and they're lugging them out every Sunday.
Mhm.
It would make sense that you might have to paint it or provide flooring to those properties more frequently through an Airbnb, right? Or a
Mhm.
VRBO. You might also find that a property like a condo that you described, which is a perfect investment property,
Mhm.
it's a perfect investment property to get started in, kind of dip the toe in, if you will,
Mhm.
because most of the exterior maintenance is off is the responsibility of the homeowners association. Most of the landscaping is the responsibility of the homeowners. The maintenance of the pool or the community gate or the security guard out front. And so oftentimes a home and a homeowners association allows an investor, maybe they're the spectator that I described, and they want to be an investor, just they don't want to take on the responsibility of finding a tenant every weekend. They just like to find a tenant that's going to stay there for a year, and maybe that condo can be a good fit for them. Commercial condos can also be a great fit. Somebody typically maintains the exterior of the property, the exterior of the building, and now you're finding a tenant for a commercial application. A commercial application generally has a longer term tenancy. Think about a business that moves into a certain a certain community, a business community now. Every time that business changes address, removes their sign, they lose something very significant, and that's called goodwill. They lose their goodwill. If you think about it, we could probably remember off the top of our head where the closest McDonald's is, or the closest Chevron gas station,
Mhm.
or whatever commodity, the closest Safeway grocery store. If that business moves around, you lose that connection to those local residents that just remember you as a staple in the community. That applies to office space. That applies to commercial. That applies to retailers. And so often people move because, oh, they like this new building, that new community. Every time they move, they lose that goodwill. That goodwill that was that brand recognition when they thought of that product service, they thought of you in that location. And now they go there and there's a coming soon sign or a vacancy sign or a for lease sign, and it's no longer your business. So a commercial condo can be a great place to start this because generally that tenant doesn't want to move. They're incentivized to stay there. And the longer they're there, the more likely they want to remain there because people have remembered them for decades in that location. And this is why you don't see businesses often move and then 2 years later they move again, they move again. Those businesses that do that don't generally survive, so we don't think about them. The businesses that were there, they secured a lease, they built brand recognition, they built market awareness, they had what I call the goodwill. I know where my dentist is, I know where my doctor is, I know where my real estate agent's office is,
Mhm.
and they built that goodwill. Those are the ones that are typically thriving in the marketplace.
Mhm. And right now, at the time of this recording, we're in month 7 of COVID-19, and many people have lost their jobs. Life's a little unsettled right now. And I love how you have in the 888 formula the vacancy, the 8%,
Yeah,
because, and also we're talking about 15-year mortgage and paying down
that's
your
right.
principal because it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to be as detrimental as if you didn't have that safety net.
Well, that's exactly right, Christina, because if you don't know these numbers, the scenario that you gave me, you don't know these numbers, you might think you're actually making money on the property. And then at the end
Mhm.
of the year, you wonder why your bank account is empty or in the red, or why you had to continue to make capital contributions to that real estate account because you were running short. Like, where did that happen? Well, it happened because there was a month vacancy. It happened because you had to make some maintenance on the property. It happened because you needed to engage the services of a property manager to re-rent the property or just to maintain the property. COVID has brought some other factors to the equation, like rental eviction moratoriums, right? And so
Mhm.
today, with courthouses being closed, very, very challenging for a lot of landlords that own property and that are not receiving the rent, and they can't do much about it. And that's a very interesting dynamic that investors are trying to find solutions to. Some of them are utilizing mortgage forbearance plans, so they're forbearing their mortgage so that they can afford that tenant the ability to not pay rent if they've lost their job or they have COVID, something related to COVID health issues. Others are selling those properties and selling those investment homes. The Airbnb, which you and I always talk about, has been very interesting because there was a time where it was very difficult to rent out your Airbnb, your VRBO, your vacation rental home. Why? Because it was difficult to open it up, just like hotels weren't open based on the county that we were in. Or you think about the travel industry. You own a VRBO in a destination that requires outside people to get on a flight or to get on a cruise ship. These travel industries have been significantly impacted. Now, here's the other interesting factor about the vacation rentals or the Airbnbs is when you think about the Airbnbs, for some people, it's actually improved the number of tenants, and they've actually gotten more as a result of COVID. Now, not COVID specifically, but the economics impacts of COVID. And so, for example, if you have an Airbnb or VRBO that's within driving perimeter from Sacramento and the Bay Area, you're really busy right now. You are completely booked, and you know this because people they're choosing an alternative to getting on a flight, getting on a cruise ship, and that alternative is we'll get in our car and we'll take our family and we're going to go to this Airbnb, and it's just our family. We're not in a hotel, we're not at a resort, we're not even at a campground. We're not on a cruise ship. It's just our family. So that's created a demand for Airbnb and VRBO that has been unprecedented. There is so many people that within a reasonable driving proximity that would rather drive for a vacation today than fly or cruise. That's been a game changer. And so that's also been impacted all as a result of COVID. Let's go to the commercial application. We know that small businesses are struggling in this market.
Right.
You own a commercial business, 40% of small businesses are being impacted as a result of, maybe all businesses are impacted, 40% of them are expected not to make it. That is a devastating number for the local economy. That is a devastating number of businesses that are struggling. And of course, those that are in the restaurant business know exactly what I'm talking about today, as their seating capacity, which was at 100%, now their capacity is only 25 or 50%. And so that makes it difficult for that business to succeed. But yet, even in that, Christina, we have some market opportunities. Look at the market opportunities that are growing for things like Amazon and for warehouse space. Here in our community, we just have a massive Amazon center that has opened up. That's a newer industry that's taking over old industrial space and making it into distribution or even manufacturing, right? So there's these opportunities that exist. And so even that, there are opportunities within some of these challenges that exist to find some solutions.
That's great. So do you think the biggest mistake that investors make is not doing the 888 financial and that analysis? Is that the biggest mistake they make? I
think it's certainly one of them. One of the big mistakes, they don't know the 888. They sit down and they run the numbers way too late and they're way too optimistic. And they don't know the numbers. And so then they end up discovering and they have a surprise. You know, one of the things that we've kind of pride ourselves in our real estate office is no surprises. Nobody likes to show up to the signing table and say, surprise, you owe an extra $1,000. Surprise. Right. You know, the landlord, the tenant or the homeowner left these items at the property. Surprise, you've got something else to pay for after you've moved into this property or after you purchase it. And so knowing these numbers help take these surprise elements and begin to reduce them, minimize them, and in some cases even eliminating them. And this 888 formula can be a great starting point. It's certainly not comprehensive. There are other things, I've talked about them, that can impact value, can impact the investment, or what's also called the capitalization rate, your rate of return. There are other things that can impact it, but these three, they exist on most properties. And you know these three, the 888 and you know that they generally operate around 8% plus or minus when you own a plethora of different types of property. And it'll give you not only the categories, but it'll give you a healthy percentage to stay focused on, especially when you start looking at residential property. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that they make, they're optimistic. They don't run the numbers. They buy the property, they put it in their portfolio in hopes that they're what they imagine would come to fruition. And when it doesn't, they're discouraged and they're frustrated. A much better way to do that is to know exactly what a tenant's willing to pay for a property. We talked about how to do that.
Right.
Know exactly what the property is worth and know what your real rent is, not the gross rent, but what your real rental income is. And you do that by utilizing this 888 formula.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That's all the time we have for today. And that helps so much. You gave us real tools, real practical ways that we can invest in property. So thank you.
My pleasure.
You can go to investorsthrive.com to access more information on purchasing investment property. And you can join us next week when Rick shares about the secret behind the Rick Fuller team, our culture tree, which is how you've built this business and how you're thriving. So thank you for sharing the secret behind your business. You don't want to miss it. So have a great day, and we can't wait for you to join us next time. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.